On today's show, Eric DeCosta makes more underrated moves as the Baltimore Ravens roster continues to take its final shape. We talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form wherever you get your podcast. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens show plus more. And thank you to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners, and for somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. Another week that we are closer to football for the Ravens, and it cannot get here soon enough, if I'm being honest. I am tired of watching the Orioles lose here in Baltimore, and the Ravens obviously give us that nice winning feeling, at least most years, right? Most years the Ravens are competitive, and that certainly has been the case in the Lamar Jackson era, and the Ravens are doing what they can to round out their roster. It seems pretty set right now. We've talked about that on the show, but Eric DeCosta making some final moves. We're going to talk about those here on the show today, since Ravens roster does take its final form. So we'll talk about the run stuffer they added. They also signed an intriguing undrafted rookie free agent, and there is some news on David Ajabo that I think has to be talked about here today as well. So we'll talk about all that, and then we'll answer the question, is this the best roster in the Lamar Jackson era? Dive into that conversation a little bit as well. Let's talk about the run stuff for the Baltimore added here. This will be the first topic for us today. John Jenkins signed with the Ravens over the weekend. Now, Jenkins is 35 years old, and obviously for Baltimore, there was a massive, both figuratively and literally, a massive hole to fill on that Baltimore defensive line with the retirement of Michael Pierce. And I think Michael Pierce was the biggest loss of Baltimore's offseason. You know, you can talk about Brandon Stevens, which honestly, I don't think a lot of people are talking about him in that light. But, you know, Patrick McCarry, who did the Ravens really lose? I think it really was Michael Pierce. So the Ravens have to replace that in the middle. You didn't need to sign or even trade for or add a crazy good player in terms of the next Aaron Donald, go get a star at the defensive line spot. You have enough there right now, where all you really needed to add was that guy, that depth piece for them. And while I think this is a downgrade of sorts from Michael Pierce, Jenkins is someone who, in my opinion, is honestly underrated at the position, despite the fact that he is 35 years old. He was a 17-game player for the Raiders last season. He spent the last 2 years there, 600 snaps per season, 2 sacks, 107 tackles, and 6 passes deflected. He's played the last 2 full seasons. So obviously when you talk about football, sports, injuries, and whatnot, availability is one of the best traits you can have, and John Jenkins has been available. He displays a lot of good power on the interior, can eat up some double teams for you as well, and that's the type of thing that you want. You know, Michael Pierce was really hard to defend because he would just eat up space, eat up blockers, and that obviously freed up guys like Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen when he was in Baltimore, and some of these second and third level players to go and make tackles. Now, he's not going to provide a lot from the pass rushing department. You know, he had a sack in each of the last 2 seasons with Las Vegas, but I think Pierce provided more of you could put him in passing situations if you felt like it. I think that for John Jenkins, the thing that Pierce had over him is Pierce was more of a pass rusher. Not that, you know, Michael Pierce was lighting the world up with 10 sacks every single season from the interior, but I think that Jenkins is not going to provide Baltimore that this season, and it's going to be much more of a rotation in terms of you want Jenkins in there for the obvious run situations, early down player, and then you can rotate in the others. You know, that obviously comes down to Nnamdi Madubuike and Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, etc. You want those guys, Aeneas Peebles, those are the guys you're going to want in on those passing situations because, quite frankly, Jenkins just is not going to give you that. So You look at Baltimore's defensive line room now, and I just mentioned the guys in it. It's going to be Madubuike, Jones, Washington, Peebles, and now Jenkins. I like that room. I would have liked it a lot better if Pierce was still there instead of Jenkins, but I still think Jenkins provides Baltimore what they needed. They needed a big body. It was very apparent that once Pierce left, they were going to need somebody to fill that void. Jenkins does that. And I'm feeling good about that D-line room. And if you've been listening to me on this show, the D-line room has been my favorite positional group on this roster for the past couple of seasons. And honestly, I don't think that changes this year. I think now no matter BK, we know he's faced a lot of double teams, especially last season after his breakout year 2 years ago. And while the production went down for him, teams were focusing on him. And I think this is going to be the same case again this season. Travis Jones is one of my favorite players on this roster. I think he's in line for another step up this year. And I think that the Ravens certainly need him to be that, even with Pierce gone. They need Jones here. Broderick Washington, who, quite frankly, hasn't necessarily lived up to that extension that he signed a couple of years ago. And it's been kind of disappointing. I think Washington, they're going to need him as well. Can he make a step or a leap? And then I think, Aeneas Peebles was one of my favorite day 3 players of the entire draft. He was someone that I was pounding the table for Baltimore to take in the 4th round because I thought he was that good. But again, I think that Baltimore's roster right now, and this is evident in the D-line room and obviously a bunch of other positions as well, but since we're talking D-line, we're going to focus on it. A guy like Aeneas Peebles is a little undersized. In fact, it's not a little. He is undersized for the position. And he's not going to give you much in way of run defense, being stout against the run, being able to eat up double teams like that. So it's more of a situational like John Jenkins and Aeneas Peebles, who are supposed to be more of your depth pieces this year, are going to contribute in spots that their strengths are in. It lines up really nicely for those guys. Where obviously Madubuike, Jones, those are your guys you can trust on all 3 downs. And I know that there's been some conversation in years about Madubuike's run defense. I don't necessarily buy into that as much as other people do. I think that he's improved in that area. Jones, to me, is a 3-down player. He's a force against the run and as a pass rusher. And I hope that leap starts up here for him or continues for him. But Peebles is someone you probably don't want on the field in a 3rd and short situation. John Jenkins is. And I think that the other thing that Baltimore can kind of unlock here is you can move a guy like Tavius Robinson inside. Maybe if they do want to kick the tires on a Jadeveon Clowney, which we've talked about on this show, maybe they do that and you can move a guy like him inside as well. They have bigger edge guys that you can move inside on those 3rd and shorts, 2nd and shorts to stifle an opposing offense from getting a 1st down. Jenkins just is their big body guy. So again, I'm not going to sit here and declare the Ravens are Super Bowl champions because they signed John Jenkins. That'd be a pretty foolish thing of me to do here, for being honest, right? But in my opinion, it was a move that Baltimore needed to make. And for the guys that were available, by the way, there really wasn't a lot out there, unless you were a fan of like a Linval Joseph or a couple of those other. Again, these were guys, we're not on day 2 of free agency here. The options were limited. And I think Baltimore made pretty much the best out of a situation where they just needed a guy. And honestly, if it was another guy, the drop off or better than John Jenkins, it wouldn't have been that much. So this isn't a move that I'm looking too much into in terms of oh, well, this move doesn't work out for Baltimore, man, their defense is cooked. They're not going to be no, of course not. Of course not. But I still think that this is a move that Baltimore needed to make. It was one of the final moves that I think that Baltimore had on their checklist. There are a couple of others now, especially with the Ardarius Washington injury, adding a veteran safety, I think's that last move, but this was one of the last ones. And it's really exciting to kind of see Baltimore's roster take this shape, take this form. And I think it's a really, really, really good one. So John Jenkins, your newest Baltimore Ravens defensive lineman. Coming up, though, we'll talk about the news the Ravens got on David Ajabo. And speaking of the outside linebacker edge group, the Ravens made an intriguing undrafted free agent addition. So stay tuned. A lot coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Skylight. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. The sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. And look, in my life, there's a lot of I don't knows. My schedule can be all over the place, and Skylight makes it so easy to eliminate that I don't know from my routine and my family's routine. Plus, having the color-coded ability to know who does what when we're talking about responsibilities, Skylight having that is such a game changer. So right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Monday. If you missed it, we had a busy week over here on Locked On Ravens last week. I mean, for better and for worse, when you're talking about the news that dropped for the Ravens, obviously Ardarius Washington was the worst part of that, suffering that torn Achilles. Had a breakdown episode on that, instant reaction. We talked about that a bunch. Then obviously the next day, Derrick Henry gets extended. We had a reaction episode on that too. And then obviously the schedule came out, and so we had a reaction, just reactions and episodes and a bunch of content over here on Locked On Ravens, as we do every week here. We're 5 days a week, no matter what. Plus more, we have some bonus episodes, live reactions like I just talked about. We go live after every Ravens game. So be sure to check in here on Locked On Ravens whenever you need your Ravens fixes. We'll be here for you. But the Ravens got some news on David Ajabo. Obviously, Ajabo has been somewhat of a controversial figure for a lot of the fan base when it comes to his production, which quite frankly just has not been there. And a lot of that does have to do with the injury situation for him, which, look, quite frankly, has been very unfortunate for him. All the talent in the world, a ton of potential, but the fact that Baltimore spent a second-round pick on him and his career has gone the way it has is unfortunate. He's played just 18 games in 3 years, including just 5 in his first 2 years, 4 total sacks on the season, and just can't really break the rotation. And honestly, his roster spot is very much in jeopardy. If the season started today, David Ajabo would not be on my final 90-man, well, I guess 53-man roster. But the reason I said 90-man was because there was news in regards to David Ajabo's status on the 90-man roster and what he actually counts for. So the Ravens, they were awarded an international player exception for David Ajabo. It's an international exemption spot. So he's not going to count towards the 90-man roster. So it allows them to add a technically 91st player to their roster, which obviously will not affect the 53-man. If he does make this roster, well, he's going to be one of 53. That is not going to change. But when you talk about this, it's an underrated, I guess, procedural thing that gives the Ravens a look at another player. And it's a savvy thing for Baltimore that the NFL was able to grant them this. And I think that it's just another way that Baltimore, gets any little advantage they can. It's just any little advantage. They did that when they tried to get the comp pick out of Deontay Johnson, which didn't work, but that's what Baltimore was hoping for in that situation. And then you have a lot of people praising this move where the Ravens is the benefit of the whole thing here is the Baltimore, if Ajabo does not make the team and clears waivers, they can stash him as their 17th practice squad player because obviously if he makes the 53, there's no benefit to the exemption. So he's still playing under his rookie deal right now. And so teams would have to claim him for $1.7, $1.8 million. And, well, the Ravens could then elevate him 3 times total while he's protected. And then after the 3 times, teams can take him away off of the Ravens practice squad. But it actually feels like something somewhat significant because he is a second-round pick. So, look, if he does clear waivers, he can do what he wants. There was an example that a couple of years ago with Ben Mason where obviously Baltimore cut him. I think they were probably anticipating he was going to go to Baltimore's practice squad, and then he kind of pulls a fast one on him and goes to New England, and John Harbaugh was mad about that. So there's no guarantee Ajabo would even want to come back to Baltimore's practice squad if he was cut. But again, it does give them the opportunity to look at other guys and just have an extra player on their 90-man roster as the offseason unfolds. And by the way, this is not the first time that this has happened. This is actually the second year in a row that Baltimore has the international roster exemption for David Ajabo. So again, just a savvy piece of work here. And on top of that, speaking of that outside linebacker position, Rucker out of North Carolina, the edge rusher, he is now a member of the Ravens. He signed a deal with Baltimore. He's honestly, to me, super intriguing. Someone that came on Rucker who was a 6th rounder in a lot of people's eyes. I had him as like a late 5th rounder. I was that high on him. I know Dane Brugler, I believe, had a 6th rounder. I think some other people maybe had like a 7th on him. Rucker had 22 sacks over the course of his 4 years at UNC. He had 14 and a half of those over his final 2 years, but he suffered a fibula injury, which ended his last year at UNC a little early, and he actually wasn't able to do any of the pre-draft process stuff because of it. Now, a lot of these guys, that get signed a little bit later in the process after the draft, they'll attend mini camps on a tryout basis, and Rucker was actually with the Eagles on a tryout basis, before ending up signing with the Ravens. So I think that this is a really intriguing signing for Baltimore for a couple of reasons. It's taking a swing. It's a harmless swing on a guy that showed production, showed improvement over his last 2 seasons. And we know that Baltimore loves trying to find those undrafted gems. I know it's been a little bit less of a priority in recent seasons, not that it isn't for them, but I know, the big story for decades in Baltimore was, oh man, the Ravens always find those like 1 or 2 undrafted guys that turn into gems and make huge impacts. And that certainly still happens. I mean, a guy I just mentioned, Darius Washington, was an undrafted guy that has made an impact for Baltimore. You have other guys as well that have contributed, but it feels like Baltimore, I don't think there was ever like a favoritism thing for undrafted guys. I think that's not true, but it just feels like it's less of a priority for them to try to find those guys. Feels like they're trying to get more proven guys in to help this window, which, I think has its benefits and also has its drawbacks, but I think it's probably the right thing to do. But again, this could be something where Rucker shows a little bit in the preseason, makes the practice squad. Again, I think it's probably an uphill climb for him, considering, you also still have Malik Ham on the roster. There's no guarantee Ajabo makes it right now. Again, I would not have him on the roster. So he would have to ball out, but we've seen crazier things happen. I mean, a guy we talked about in the first time, Michael Pierce. I remember that last preseason game against the Saints when he needed to make a name for himself. He won a roster spot that game. There wasn't a spot for him. He made the Ravens give him a roster spot. And look at the career he had. Look at how much success he had at the NFL level. So, again, this is a guy that gives you a lot of intriguing options just to look at. So, he's 6'1", 254. Dane Brugler had him as his 29th overall edge rusher in the class. So, there were some guys in the class that got drafted that Dane Brugler did not like as much as Rucker here. But just, again, a swing on a guy. It's all the Ravens want. And Eric DeCosta has made it very clear that they're going to take swings on guys. They're going to, figure out ways to get as many swings as they can. And that's why I think they love the undrafted free agency process, as well as having a lot of picks in the actual draft, because, you're never going to bat 1,000 on these things. You're always going to have hits, you're going to have misses. And the more swings you have, the more opportunities you have to get hits. And that includes an undrafted free agency. So Rucker, the latest addition to this Ravens roster. But coming up in the final part of the show, the Ravens have had a lot of good rosters in the Lamar Jackson era. Is this the best one? Stay tuned. We'll answer that coming up on the show. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Monday. As always, appreciate everybody for being here today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen each and every single day. As always, we'll be here for you through the busiest parts of the season to the least busy parts of the offseason. Every single weekday, we have an episode for you. It's been doing this here since 2019, and it has been an incredible journey. Hit episode 1,500 consecutively a couple weeks ago. That was awesome, and can't wait to hit many more milestones here on this show. Speaking of, I've covered this team ever since Lamar's second season back in 2019. And there have been a lot of good rosters, including that 2019 roster in the Lamar Jackson era. But there's been that question that everybody's asking. At least a lot of people I've seen are asking this question. Is this the best roster that Lamar Jackson has had around him in his era? Is the Ravens starting quarterback? So if you want to talk about that, then yes, I've been covering Lamar for his entire existence as a starting quarterback full season-wise. And he started during his rookie season and did a really good job at it, all circumstances involved there. Now, I think when you stack up the Ravens roster, this 2025 roster really doesn't have a lot of holes, if we're being honest. I mean, you kind of look at it, and now with John Jenkins in, the one thing that I could see Baltimore doing still, as I mentioned, is adding that veteran safety. And I still have the list up here. We can break it down a little bit of safety options that Baltimore could bring in. Justin Simmons does headline that list, but then you also have guys like Julian Blackmon, Jordan Whitehead, Quandre Diggs, Jordan Poyer, Marcus Williams technically on this list, but we all know he's not coming back. Let's be real about that. Chuck Clark, Kevon Wallace, Marcus May, Von Bell, Rodney McLeod. So there are options, but regardless of who they bring in, or even if they don't bring somebody in, that to me feels like the last final infinity stone for this Baltimore team. You look up and down this roster, quarterback is Lamar, running back is super deep with Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, Rasheen Ali, fullback with Ricard, wide receiver. I'm liking this room with Zay, Rashod, DeAndre Hopkins, and then you have your role guys like a Tylan Wallace, Tez Walker, and look, hey, don't sleep on LeJontay Wester. I'm telling you. LeJontay could play a role for them this season. Obviously in the return game, but maybe as a receiver as well. Tight end, we know that's the deepest tight end room in the league. Offensive line really feels like the one to me that I'm kind of looking at. Offensive line guard-wise, right? With Falele, Voorhees, Cleveland. We don't know if Emory Jones is going to get a shot there, but it just feels like that is the uncertain part for a lot of people, myself included, right? I'm hoping that Daniel Falele can take a step this season because it feels pretty much like Baltimore's going to give him that right guard job. And then at the left guard spot, feels like it's going to be a three-way battle between Voorhees, Jones, and Cleveland, in my opinion. Obviously, the tackle spots are good there with Rosengarten and Stanley, and then Linderbaum at the center spot. I think you feel pretty confident. D-line, I feel good. Edge room, I do feel good, especially with Mike Green in there, who I think is going to be a really good rookie for them. Inside linebacker is another one of those weaker spots for me where Roquan is Roquan, but, relying on guys like Trenton Simpson, Teddy Buchanan, Jake Hummel, that depth there I think is weak. So unless Simpson can have a breakout year or Buchanan can step up as a rookie, that might be a weak spot outside of Roquan. I think corner depth is good. Safety depth, if they do sign another vet, is good. But, we'll just have to see how that works. Special teams, a lot of uncertainty there as well. Obviously, with Justin Tucker gone, who, again, didn't have a great 2024 anyway. But, the resume speaks for itself. And obviously, off the field is a whole different situation for him. But, you're entering uncharted waters in this decade with Tyler Loop, who's a rookie and has the leg. And the Ravens are good at kicker evaluations. But we're going to see. Jordan Stout's had a pretty up and down career so far. So we'll see with him as well. The Wolfpack is now gone, right? This is an entirely new era of Ravens special teams. Justin Tucker, Sam Cook, who is now out of the organization altogether after his spot on the coaching staff was removed, and then Morgan Cox. All those guys are gone. So now it's Loop and Stout and Nick Moore. Those are your three guys. I don't know what their group nickname is. They might have to come up with one now, but it is a new era there. So this is a really good roster, compared to the 2019 roster, which, that roster wasn't supposed to be as good as it was, right? That was a really good team, historic team. But that roster was supposed to not be a 14-win team. They overachieved based off of their expectations. A lot of that had to do with Lamar going nuclear that season, which was awesome to watch. But, you look in that wide receiver room. The wide receiver room this year is better. in the wide receiver room, I think 2023 is that other roster that to me felt perfect for them. Like 2023, that wide receiver room too is like, yeah, you still had Zay, you still had Bateman. Zay was a rookie that year, obviously, but outside of that, like Odell, like I favor DeAndre over Odell. I know it's not that big of a difference. Like I think that DeAndre will have more of an impact than Odell did in Baltimore in terms of on field. But hey, Odell had moments for them. I think the big thing is like that 2019 team. I guess let's break it down a little bit. That wide receiver room just doesn't do a lot for me outside of Marquise Brown, where it was Willie Snead, Miles Boykin, etc. And, you look at some of the other guys who started on this team, like a Chris Wormley, that was kind of the end of Brandon Carr's career. Earl Thomas was really good for him on the field. I mean, again, off of it was a completely different story. But it just felt like, yes, the Ravens, they had star power this season, but the depth wasn't nearly as good as this upcoming 2025 team, in my opinion. So then you look at the 2023 roster, and this was a team that, the offense looks pretty similar. I mean, obviously you lose 3 offensive linemen here. I mean, I think that your guard spot with Kevin Zeitler was a lot more solid. I think right tackle, I favor Rosengarten there over Morgan Moses. Left guard, John Simpson versus whoever it is for Cleveland. Maybe that's a wash. Simpson exceeded expectations, but by no means was he this Pro Bowl player for them. But then look, I mean, Gus Edwards, Derrick Henry is a lot better than Gus Edwards. And that's no disrespect to Gus, obviously. Gus had a heck of a career in Baltimore. But then you kind of look across the board and, you feel a lot better, I think, with Travis Jones on the interior as opposed to Broderick Washington, who technically is a starter on this team. I think with Stevens gone and Nate Wiggins in, that's an upgrade. I think that the only thing you're looking at is, despite how people feel about Patrick Queen, he is an upgrade over Trenton Simpson in this exercise we're doing here. Left outside linebacker, right outside linebacker. The starters that year technically were Malik Harrison and Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, Van Noy is on. I'd probably say Van Noy or Owe would have gotten the nod over Harrison, in my opinion here. But again, I feel like the depth is better on this roster than the 2023 team. Excuse me. Like I think 2025. The depth is better than 2023. So I will say that this is the best roster in the Lamar Jackson era. Now, obviously, this is on paper, right? We haven't seen these guys play a snap together this year. It's going to come down to who can stay the healthiest, if guys can continue to ascend, not fall off. Like a lot of that's going to have to come in here. But you look at on paper, and the guys I listed off earlier in the segment, like this roster, not only does it have a ton of star power across the board, but, you also have to factor in where these guys were in their careers. Kyle Hamilton was a second-year player in 2023. He's ascended so far from that point in just 2 years, and now he is entering his 4th full year as a safety for them. Like it's night and day, the last 2 years for Kyle Hamilton, even though, again, he was awesome he's been awesome his whole career, for being honest. But even then, look at guys like an Isaiah Likely and some of these other players that have ascended from that spot as well, and just where they were at these points in their careers. Nnamdi Madubuike, right? Nnamdi was awesome during this 2023 season, but I don't think that means that he's just fallen off a cliff here because his stat production wasn't as good in 2024. Like these are all things that I kind of factor in, but I'm not saying this roster is perfect this season for Baltimore. There's certainly some holes and flaws that they do have to address, and we're not going to know the health situation until the season is over. But I am going to say this is the best roster in the Lamar Jackson era. I'm not going to say it's not particularly close, but I do think that this team has had multiple chances to win a Super Bowl. 2019 and 2023 are the ones that come to mind in this Lamar Jackson era we have seen. But 2025 might be his best shot, especially if Lamar can continue to ascend the way that he has over the first 7 years of his career. That's all I have here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. Tomorrow coming up, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, so be sure on the way out to hit that like and subscribe button in video form. Follow along in audio form as well, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.